Story 1. The Man Who Fell from the Sky into a Living Room. The sky doesn't just give you rain or snow. Sometimes it gives you bodies. And on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday in 1975, it gave my mother a dead man who crashed through her ceiling while she was making a pot of tea. My family lived in a modest, semi-detached house in a quiet, leafy suburb of London. It was the kind of place where nothing exciting ever happened. My mother, a woman of strict routine, was in the living room at precisely 3:45 p.m. The kettle had just begun its shrill whistle in the kitchen. She'd taken 2 steps towards it when the world exploded. It wasn't an explosion of fire, but of plaster, splintered wood, and a deafening wet crash. The ceiling directly above her favorite armchair, the one my father had fallen asleep in just an hour before, simply ceased to exist. A tremendous shape, trailing dust and debris, smashed through the roof, through the attic, through the ceiling, and slammed into the floral-patterned upholstery with a force that shook the entire house. The armchair disintegrated. The coffee table shattered. My mother was thrown backward by the shockwave, a cloud of dust and insulation filling the room. When the dust settled and her ears stopped ringing from the impact, she saw it. A man, or what was left of one. He was lying in a crater of her living room floor, partially wrapped in a strange, twisted cloth that she later realized was the remains of a parachute. He wasn't moving. He was dressed in an unusual suit, not a flying suit but something darker, and he was surrounded by glittering, colorful stones that skittered across the parquet floor like hard candy. She screamed, of course. The neighbors came running. Police and ambulances arrived within minutes. The scene was one of impossible chaos. A hole in the roof showed a perfect square of gray sky. The man was pronounced dead at the scene, but he wasn't a pilot. There were no reports of plane crashes, no reports of skydiving accidents. The parachute was not standard issue, and those glittering stones. The initial police theory was that he was a criminal, a jewel thief perhaps, who had botched a getaway via light aircraft and fallen. But the math didn't add up. There was no record of any major jewel heist in the area that day. The stones, sapphires, rubies, uncut diamonds, were real but untraceable. The path he fell from suggested an altitude no small plane could reach without being tracked. And then there was the state of his body. The injuries were comprehensive. The official report cited massive trauma consistent with a fall from an extreme height. For weeks, my house was a spectacle. Police tape, investigators, reporters. My mother had a nervous breakdown. She kept repeating, "He came from nowhere. The sky was empty." The official story, the one that eventually made the papers, was of a mystery faller, a likely victim of an aviation accident that was never located. Case closed. But I was a teenager then, obsessed with mysteries. I snooped. I listened when the detectives talked in low voices in our garden. I heard one phrase, spoken with utter confusion. The coroner said the ice crystals in his lungs weren't from our atmosphere. They hushed up when they saw me. The final report made no mention of atmospheric conditions. The jewels were logged as evidence and then, according to some whispers, disappeared from the property room. The man was buried as a John Doe. My mother never sat in that room again. We moved the following year. But sometimes, on clear, quiet afternoons, I look up. I don't see clouds or sun. I see an infinite, silent blue door. And I wonder what, or who, might be failing to come through it properly. We think of falling as a downward thing, but what if he wasn't falling down to us? What if he was falling out of something else entirely? Story 2. The woman who woke up speaking in a forgotten tongue. I didn't lose my memory. I lost my voice. Or rather, I lost control of it. One moment I was Michelle from Wisconsin, a 34-year-old graphic designer with a slight Midwestern twang. The next, I was a stranger in my own throat, speaking in the cadence of a ghost. It happened after the migraine. I've had migraines since college, the painful, light-sensitive kind. But this one was different. It was a silent, pressure-building monster that settled behind my eyes for 2 days. No aura, just a deep, throbbing dread. On the 3rd morning, the pain vanished, just gone. I felt eerily light, empty. I got out of bed, walked to the kitchen where my husband Ben was making coffee. "Hey," I said, "I think it's finally over." except I didn't say, hey. The sound that came out of my mouth was a clipped, sharp Achtung. The sentence that followed was grammatically perfect, but spoken in a guttural, precise German accent. I sounded like a World War II movie villain. Ben turned, coffee pot in hand, and laughed. Very funny, babe. Doing your Schwarzenegger impression? I stared at him confused. What are you talking about? I said. But again, the words were wrapped in that alien accent. My tongue felt too large. My palate was shaping sounds in ways my brain hadn't commanded. Panic, cold and sharp, shot through me. Ben, I'm not joking! The accent grew stronger, more panicked. His smile faded. He saw the terror in my eyes. Over the next hour, we descended into a nightmare of confusion. Every word I spoke was in this new, unwavering German accent. I couldn't turn it off. I couldn't access my old voice. It was as if the Michelle voice file in my brain had been corrupted and replaced. But here's the thing. I don't speak German. I've never been to Germany. My family heritage is Irish and Norwegian. Doctors called it foreign accent syndrome, a rare neurological condition, often following a migraine, stroke, or head trauma, where damage to the speech centers of the brain alters prosody, the rhythm, stress, and intonation of speech. It made me a medical curiosity. News outlets picked it up. Wisconsin woman wakes up with German accent, but the doctors and the news missed the subtle horror. It wasn't just an accent. My personality, the very rhythm of my thoughts, began to subtly shift. I developed a sudden intolerance for clutter, a desire for strict order. I found myself craving foods I'd never liked. Strong rye bread, bitter cheeses. I'd catch myself humming tunes I didn't recognize, old European folk songs. The worst moment came 2 months in. I was frustrated, crying in front of the mirror, trying to force my old voice out. Just talk like yourself, I screamed at my reflection. But the face staring back, twisted in anguish, spoke back in that firm, foreign tone. But this is yourself now. Why do you fight it? It felt like an exorcism in reverse. Something wasn't being cast out. It was settling in. Was it just crossed wires in my Broca's area? Or was my brain, in its trauma, tapping into some deep genetic memory? An ancestral voice buried in my DNA? The accent has softened now, after years of speech therapy. I can almost pass for a lifelong immigrant. Ben and I are still together, though he sometimes looks at me with a flicker of uncertainty, like he's waiting for his real wife to come back. I've made peace with the voice, but in quiet moments when I'm alone, I'll speak a sentence in what I remember as my old accent. It sounds forced, fake, like a bad impression. The German lilt feels more natural. That's the true horror. You can lose more than your voice. You can lose the proof that you were ever who you think you were. Story 3. The boy who remembered a war he never fought. We named him James after his grandfather. A happy baby, a curious toddler. His first words were normal. Then, just after his second birthday, the nightmares began. Not just crying in the night, blood-curdling, panicked screams. We'd rush into his room to find him thrashing in his crib, eyes wide with a terror no 2-year-old should comprehend. When we'd calm him, he'd babble words we didn't understand. Airplane crash, he'd sob. Fire, can't get out. We dismissed it as night terrors, an overactive imagination fueled by cartoons. But the nightmares became daytime play. He stopped playing with trucks and blocks. He only wanted his toy planes, not just to fly them, but to crash them. He'd make a screaming nosedive sound, slam the plane into the couch and say, sadly, little man didn't get out. He started calling his stuffed animals by strange names. Leonard, Big Pete, Buster. Then the details emerged. One afternoon I was drawing with him. He grabbed a red crayon and scribbled furiously on his plain drawing. That's the fire, he said matter-of-factly. Then he pointed to the cockpit. That's where Jackie got hurt. My blood ran cold. Who's Jackie, sweetie? I'm Jackie, he said, looking at me with an eerie, ancient calm. The Japanese shot my plane. It caught on fire. I crashed in the water. My wife and I were speechless. We are a pacifist family. We don't own a TV. We've never discussed war, planes, or anything remotely like this in his presence. Yet here was our son describing a naval air battle with specific technical terms. He talked about a ship he called the Natoma. He said he flew a Corsair. He said his friend Big Pete died too. The breaking point was at a family reunion. An elderly uncle, a history buff, was listening to James ramble about his plane. When James mentioned the name Natoma Bay, my uncle went pale. He pulled me aside later. Natoma Bay was an escort carrier in the Pacific in World War II, he whispered. It saw action at Iwo Jima. They flew Corsairs. Coincidence. It had to be. But the coincidence became a haunting. James knew things. He once correctly identified a model of a Corsair plane at a museum, pointing to the wing guns and saying they jammed sometimes. He drew increasingly accurate diagrams of the plane's cockpit. He developed a fear of large bodies of water, something he'd never had before. We were terrified, not of him, but for him. What was happening? Was this a psychological condition? A past life memory, as some fringe theories suggested? Or was he somehow tapping into a collective memory, a psychic echo of a dying man's final moments? The most chilling moment came one night when I was tucking him in. He looked at me, his young eyes holding a weight they shouldn't. My other mommy was sad, he said softly. I wrote her letters. I want to go home to her. You are home, James. I'm your mommy. He just shook his head. My name is James too. James H. The letters stopped coming. I want to tell her I'm okay. I researched obsessively, stumbling into the world of children's anomalous memories. I found a researcher who studied cases like this. With trembling hands, I looked up the roster of the USS Natoma Bay. There, listed among the casualties at Iwo Jima, was a pilot. His name, James M. Houston Jr. He'd been shot down, his plane crashing into the water. His body was never recovered. James is older now. The memories have faded, like a dream upon waking. He's a normal boy who likes soccer and video games. He doesn't remember talking about Jackie or the Natoma Bay. But sometimes, when a certain model of plane passes overhead, he'll stop and stare, a faint shadow of confusion crossing his face. We never told him what we found. Some doors, once opened, shouldn't be forced shut. But they also shouldn't be explored further. We live with the quiet, unsettling truth that our son arrived here not as a blank slate, but as someone carrying the unfinished, drowning echoes of another James, from another time, who never made it home. Story 4. The town that fell asleep and never fully woke up. It didn't start with a bang, or a virus, or a sinister fog. It started with a yawn. A deep, unshakable, communal yawn that spread through our small town of Ashford like a sigh. It was the summer of 1993, and we became famous for the wrong reason. We all fell asleep. I was 16. The first case was old Mrs. Henderson, the librarian. She was found dozing at her desk, head resting on an open copy of Moby Dick. Charming, we thought. Then her husband came to wake her for dinner. He couldn't. She was in a sleep so deep she had to be hospitalized. The next day, 3 farmhands collapsed in a field at noon. Then a classroom of second graders all slumping over their desks during story time. Within a week, over 200 people, a third of our town, were in a comatose state at the local hospital, which was now just a warehouse for the sleeping. It wasn't a peaceful sleep. Their eyes would dart under their lids. Some mumbled. Some laughed softly, some wept. Their bodies were alive, but their minds were elsewhere. The CDC arrived. They tested for everything: viruses, bacteria, toxins in the water, pollutants in the air. Nothing. It was as if the town itself had decided to take a nap and forgotten the alarm clock. The worst part was the waking, or the attempt at it. After about 2 weeks, people started to stir, but they didn't wake up themselves. Mrs. Henderson opened her eyes and spoke fluent, flawless Portuguese, a language she'd never studied. Billy Jacobs, a mechanic, woke up convinced he was a concert pianist from the 1920s, his fingers twitching on imaginary keys. My own little sister, Amy, woke up silent. She could write, she could understand, but she refused to speak. She'd just look at us with these ancient, knowing eyes and scribble notes. The dream isn't over. It's just layered on top. The official diagnosis was a mass psychogenic illness, a shared hysterical reaction, a sleeping sickness with no physical cause. but that felt like a lie. We who stayed awake saw the patterns. The sleepers all went under between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. They all reported in their fragmented awakenings, dreaming of the same place, a vast, silent grey beach under a static orange sky. They called it the still place. Some described seeing each other there, wandering, confused. Then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. No new people fell asleep. The afflicted either woke into their new personas or remained in a twilight state. The media lost interest. The CDC left, baffled. Our town was left permanently scarred, a community divided into the awake and the dreamers. I'm 45 now. Ashford is a ghost of its former self. The dreamers live among us, but they're not here. Mrs. Henderson runs a quiet little import shop, ordering goods from Brazil, speaking Portuguese to suppliers on the phone. Billy Jacobs gives piano lessons, playing beautiful forgotten ragtime tunes. My sister Amy became a renowned artist, painting endless, haunting variations of that grey beach. We never got an answer, but I have a theory, born of a lifetime of watching them. I don't think it was a sickness. I think it was a signal. A broadcast from somewhere or somewhen that was too strong for some minds to ignore. It didn't erase them. It overwrote them. Their consciousness tuned to a different frequency, one that leaked through during that one strange summer. The awake, like me, are just receivers stuck on the wrong channel. Sometimes on very still afternoons between 2 and 4, I feel an overwhelming drowsiness. I fight it, because I'm afraid of what I might wake up as. Or worse, I'm afraid I'll wake up and realize that this right now has been the dream all along. Story 5. The tiny corpse that wasn't human. My father was a treasure hunter, not for gold but for curiosities. He'd comb flea markets, estate sales, and the back rooms of oddity shops. His prize find came from a leather trunk in a Santiago antique store in 2003. The owner, a wizened old man with sad eyes, said it had been found in a ghost town in the Atacama Desert. La Cosa, he called it. The thing. My father paid cash. He didn't open the small, lead-lined box until we were back in our Miami home. Inside, nestled on faded velvet, was a skeleton. But not any skeleton I'd ever seen in my biology textbooks. It was about 6 inches long, fully formed, with a conical skull that rose to a point. It had 10 ribs instead of 12. Its bones were dark, desiccated, and felt unnaturally heavy. It looked constructed, like a prop from a bad alien movie. My father was delighted. A medical oddity, he proclaimed. Probably a deformed fetus preserved by the desert air. He named it Atta and put it in a glass display case in his study. I was 15, and it terrified me. It didn't feel like a tragic medical specimen. It felt purposeful. And it did something to the house. Our dog, a golden retriever named Duke, would not enter the study. He'd stand at the threshold, hair on end, and growl at the case. Electronics in that room, the desk lamp, my father's computer, would flicker for no reason. I started having vivid, repetitive dreams of a vast silent desert under a black sky with 2 moons, and a feeling of profound, lonely abandonment. My father, meanwhile, became obsessed. He reached out to anthropologists, paleontologists. Most dismissed it as a hoax, a cleverly assembled collection of animal bones. But one, a retired professor from California, came to visit. He spent 3 days with the specimen, his enthusiasm turning to quiet unease. On his last night, I overheard him arguing with my father in hushed tones. "The bone density is all wrong, Robert," the professor said. "The epiphyseal plates, it's not a child. And the cranial sutures, they're not human. This wasn't born. I don't know what it was." "It's a mutation, a terrible one," my father insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "Mutations follow genetic rules," the professor countered. This breaks them. The sequencing, if we could do it, I'm not sure you'd want to know." He left the next morning, refusing to take a sample. My father's obsession soured into a kind of fear. He stopped showing it off. The display case gathered dust. The atmosphere in the house grew heavy, waiting. The climax came the night my father decided to get rid of it. He'd gotten an offer from a private collector in Europe, a man with a reputation for buying the grotesque. "We're done with it," he told me, his face drawn. He took the lead-line box from the case. As he lifted it, Duke, from down the hall, let out a howl so mournful it froze my blood. All the lights in the house dimmed, then surged brightly. And in that moment of brilliant light, I swear I saw it. Not in the box, but standing in the corner of the study, a small, dark, slender shadow with a pointed head. It was just for a second. A projection of fear, I told myself. My father shipped it out the next day. The house felt lighter immediately. Duke went back to his old self. The dream stopped. Years later, the story exploded online. I saw the pictures. A tiny alien-like skeleton from the Atacama Desert. Private DNA tests were done. The results were a strange cocktail of the human and the inexplicable. Severe, unprecedented mutations that shouldn't have allowed for life. Contamination, some scientists said. A hoax, said others. A mummified human fetus with rare genetic disorders concluded a more mainstream study. I read all the reports. I know the scientific explanation, but I live with the memory of the weight in that room, the animal fear in my dog, and the shadow in the corner. Science calls it a tragedy of biology, a human child born so malformed it was abandoned. But in the deep, silent part of my mind, the part that still dreams of two moons, I believe my father was wrong. He didn't buy a medical oddity. He bought a message. And the message was that we are not what we think we are. Sometimes, the universe throws a curveball in the shape of a 6-inch skeleton to remind us how little we know, and how terrifying the truth might be if we ever truly found it.